So how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You filed your signatures.
I did. I'm so excited.
Nice.
It's a relief.
You have a challenger.
I
We'll get
do.
into it. We'll get into it. First off, I guess, now I feel like we do have to do some sort of an intro. This is Democratic Representative Analise Ortiz of Legislative District 24.
That's right.
House of Representatives, moving up to the Senate if all goes according to plan.
That's right.
And 1 1/3 drinks deep at this point, right?
That's right.
Any shots at the bar?
A woman
before
of the
started?
people. No, absolutely not.
Cabernet?
I'm not in college anymore.
Drinking urban here. And we're joined by a handful of our friends. Should we do like shout outs for the people who can't see?
Yeah.
I see a bunch of shaking heads there that do not want shout outs. But let's do one for Chuck, because I know Chuck doesn't want a shout out. Chuck, our original sponsor of said events. Thanks for your sponsorship, Chuck. Okay, that's enough of the name. I'm a heavy drink geek, so let's get into it.
Okay.
What's happening at the Capitol these days?
It has been chaos.
How so?
We haven't started budget negotiations. There's talk of a break coming. I learned of this from the media, not from people I should have learned about it from at the Capitol. So that's
Ben
fun.
Toma didn't call?
He didn't, unfortunately.
Does he ever call?
Every now and then.
Huh. Like
when there's issues we can agree on.
Oh.
When it comes to legislation, we have had some painful vetoes already this year.
Oh.
And we've had a whole lot of grandstanding on some of the most divisive issues like immigration and LGBTQ plus rights. And that has been emotionally draining and mentally draining. But that's the job I was elected to do.
How does this stack up to like previous years?
Well, last year was my first year in the legislature. Yeah. Although before that, I was doing legislative advocacy at the ACLU of Arizona. So I'm very familiar with the chaos of the legislature. But being elected now, last year was definitely calmer. And there was definitely more of a focus on how can we get good policy done versus how can we make the splashiest headline.
And what good policy did you get done last year?
I was really proud last year that we were able to double investments to affordable housing in the state budget. We passed some bipartisan criminal legal reform. We also created the brand new Homeless Services Fund. So all of those were things that I was excited about.
Wait, tell me about the criminal justice reform.
We passed some policies around making sure that DOC provides people with workforce training and an ID before they come home from prison.
Okay.
That was last year. And then just today, we passed a bill unanimously, I believe, that I co-sponsored, which helps people who have a criminal record obtain an occupational license. It breaks down some barriers for them. So I'm really proud that criminal justice reform has been more of a bipartisan issue since I've been in the legislature versus when I was still doing advocacy at the ACLU. Because, 5 years ago, it's kind of unheard of that we would have been able to pass something like what we just passed today. So.
And you mentioned vetoes. Which ones bothered you?
Well, I think
I haven't seen your Twitter or anything. Please bring me up to speed.
I think anyone knows me knows that I have been one of the most vocal supporters of zoning reform as a means to bring about more affordable housing. And there was really only one bill this year that would have explicitly dealt with making home ownership more affordable, and that was the Arizona Starter Homes Act. Unfortunately, this passed through both chambers with bipartisan support, which was a huge accomplishment in and of itself, seeing as just last year we were not able to get a zoning reform bill even through the Senate. So we got it on the governor's desk, and unfortunately she did veto. However, since that veto has come down, we have had a couple of meetings with her staff and the League of Cities and Towns to try and work out some compromise and see if there's potentially some language that we can add to one of the other housing bills moving to keep this home ownership dream alive.
So I mean, this is a huge thing at the Capitol. Like the cities, I'm fascinated with the dynamics within the Democratic caucus on the zoning reform issues. I'm fascinated with the emails I get about this stuff. It is, I mean, people are just nuts about it either way. Did you expect the governor to? Did you have any communications with the governor? Did you have any kind of back and forth? Yeah, I don't hear from a lot of people that kind of helpful back and forth before that stamp comes down is happening. But what's your experience then?
You know, those people are right. In the beginning, there was not that back and forth before the veto came, which was very unfortunate because I think if there were questions or concerns about the bill, we should have heard about it well before the bill landed on her desk. However, since the veto has happened, her staff has been much more willing to have those conversations early, which has been far more helpful.
Early?
Meaning on some of the other housing bills that are still moving, we've been able to have some of their feedback. For example, on the bill around backyard casitas. I know they've already been having some conversations about amendments and changes they'd like to see. So that is the kind of proactive engagement that I think we really wanted during the Starter Homes Act. And now we are working through how we can do things differently with the other housing bills.
So, like, explain to me, you're running a bill. Is it incumbent on you to ask the governor, do you like this? If we can get it to your desk, will you sign it? Is it incumbent on her to say, I have problems with this thing that you're running that seems to be getting traction? Like, from your point of view, like, whose job is it to make that connection? And if it's your job, are you able to make, like, is the governor's office responsive, essentially?
Yes, and it is incumbent upon both, I would say. You know, I was not the sponsor of the Starter Homes Act. That was Representative Biasucci. It's my understanding that he did have some proactive outreach about the bill. And I'm not sure exactly what kind of feedback he got, but it definitely wasn't the feedback that was cited in the veto letter about the Department of Defense concerns and concerns around public safety.
Those were actually interesting points. I hadn't ever heard them brought up before, but
yeah, they were things
issues
that we all
wait. We've got a firefighter in the room.
We do.
Should we ask the firefighter?
Retired.
Retired firefighter, still good enough.
He's happy to be retired.
If we start cramming in houses tighter, if we get rid of city zoning, is it actually going to mess with firefighters' ability to fight fires? I can just keep staring back. I will. You know I will. I'll hold this.
If you have zoning and regulations and people actually get permits, I can say that I don't know if it would do that. Having said that, typically the denser a place areas are, the more difficult it is to get into. But every fire you go on is different than any other fire. It's not like a football field that is 120 yards by 53 and 1/3 yards. Everything we do is different.
And I will say that the Starter Homes Act in particular included specific language that said that the changes to the zoning regulations could not impact current health and safety laws, which would include the safety aspects around emergency response. So I don't know if maybe next time we write the bill, we want to put in, we really, really mean it, that this doesn't impact health and safety, because I don't know how we can make that any more clear.
Yeah.
So if the governor cited,
Can I add a little
yes,
bit? Yeah,
chime
so
in,
my
fireman.
suggestion would be, talk to the public safety organizations, and they will give you their estimate of how it will affect their operations. Police, fire, and the other folks.
Okay, if anyone couldn't hear that, we got a hard maybe. It was an expertly
Very
delivered
hard, maybe.
lobbyist of a maybe. If I ever heard one. Are you raising a hand? We don't raise hands here. Just shout out. Come on.
Well, so I guess question in rebuttal to is that just basing this question off of what happened in the city of Phoenix with their guest house casita law, right? That was passed through the city council, is they had certain parameters based on lot size and the ADU size, the accessory dwelling unit size. So with that, all of all of the safety concerns were really taken into account with that, because we've got the size of the lot and access with the size of the actual structure. So I guess the big question that I have in that is that it is the quote unquote the health and safety that that important when it's already been considered, or is it better to make sure that we have folks who have homes?
Mhm.
It also sounds like a bit of NIMBYism.
There's a lot of NIMBYism. And to your point, I think the bill does account, for those health and safety. We don't want people living in unsafe structures, and that's why the language really accounted for that. And I think when we're talking about this, right, it can be, even the governor's veto letter called this an unprecedented experiment. It's not an unprecedented experiment. It's the way we used to build homes in the 50s and 60s, when small starter homes were far more affordable for American families. And that's exactly what my community of Maryvale is, right? One of the first master planned communities in the entire country. And so we have to just think about, if this was good enough for a home for our parents and grandparents, why is it not acceptable for our generation? We're being told we have to have these huge lot sizes with garages and certain kinds of fence and certain kinds of tiles on the roof, when what we want is just a place to be able to afford to live and raise our families.
Well, and with that, right, I mean, one of the biggest things is that at the early 1900s, that was when it was decided that we wouldn't build up, we would build out, right? This is coming from someone who's worked in real estate for the last 6.5 years or so, right? Is that, like, we as a state, before we were a state, decided that urban sprawl was what needed to happen. And a primary reason for that, when we destroyed tenement housing and things like that, was because we realized that the more plots of land we had, the greater amount of property taxes we had. And it was all solely based on that, and not really planning for the future. So when we think about that in conjunction with, sure, health and safety is one thing, but now we've got a massive homeless population. What is the health and safety concern with them, as opposed to the health and safety for future housing?
That's right.
Okay, if I can recap that in case it wasn't picked up on the mics. Oh, good. We're fine. There's a mic there. All right.
I did want to chime in on that, though. I think you made a really good point about the garage requirements, and as much as it is a housing issue, I think this is equally a transportation issue. That every car has to, or every house has to have a 2-car garage or parking space. We see massive issues with parking in any kind of new downtown development structure because we don't have an affordable, equitable transportation system. So how much of an approach, or how much stock do you take in the idea that our housing crisis is equally a transportation crisis? Phoenix is not readily accessible for people with low income or no cars. We saw, the Prop 400 original veto last year, or under the Ducey administration, and then the new issuances of it also have not been super successful. How much stock do you take in the fact that our development issues are more a transportation issue than they are a housing issue?
It's such an important point, and it's why I sponsored a bill to reduce the minimum parking requirements for new multifamily housing developments. What we see right now is for multifamily housing, so apartments, right? Cities will require something like 2.5 stalls for every 1 bedroom. And when we look at, the apartment complexes that have been developed in places like downtown, all of those parking spots are not needed. The most egregious example was a transitional housing complex for people coming out of homelessness. And it was something like the city ordinance required them to have 112 parking spots, just arbitrarily. And the amount of residents in this complex who actually owned cars was only 12. Think about that. That means there's empty concrete parking stalls that are contributing to our heat island effect, that are not allowing our communities to be walkable, beautiful, sustainable communities that make places like Chicago or New York, other American cities that we love and cherish, so nice to live in because it's actually walkable, right? And part of that has to do so much with the way we develop housing and the way that we do not invest adequately into public transportation and safe streets and safe pedestrian lanes. So yes, it's absolutely intertwined.
So I wish we were a little farther on the juice before I ask this question. But if the reasons given in the governor's veto letter were mostly bullshit, why is
Your
the
words.
governor
Charitably so.
Yes, did I get an applause for that? Wow. Fucking wild. Yeah, mostly bullshit. Why are what is the real reason she vetoed this? And how deep in the pocket of cities is the governor?
Those were Hank's words.
Yeah, I'll say it again if I need to. But like seriously, the cities have a stranglehold over our government. Even progressive cities like Phoenix, Tempe oppose this, where you've got progressive city council members lobbying the progressive, Democratic caucus to oppose these kinds of changes. And like the best I can really figure out is like just inertia. Like we don't want to change, don't make us change.
Yeah.
But and like asking you is unfair to the cities.
Well,
but I want to hear your perspective of it.
So I want to make a couple things clear. The first is that this is not unique to Arizona. This fight between city governments and state governments over housing and zoning reform is happening all across the country. Now, Governor Hobbs was the first governor nationwide to veto a zoning reform measure of this nature. That is pretty shocking. Now, when we think about what power does the city have, or why do they have this stranglehold? I mean, to me, it's just visually, when you look at the press conference of the proponents of the Starter Homes Act, which was a diverse, multiracial coalition of mostly renters, organizations like Fuerte, Unemployed Workers United, the Arizona Dream Act Coalition, Lucha, who were all in the Rose Garden with signs, please sign HB 2570. And then you look at the opposition, which was all older, mostly white, likely homeowners, city officials, mayors, people with tremendous power who were saying, do not take away our power, our local control. Our power is more important than people's need to have a roof over their head. That contrast, I think, should really paint the picture for people, and they can make their own determination by seeing the overwhelming support and who was in support of this bill and who was against.
Well, the weird thing was there was that press conference with like Lucha and that whole crowd one day, and then the very next day it was like Warren Peterson and the developers all like signed this governor veto.
No, I do want to correct the record. There were no developers there. That was
Warren
a bipartisan.
Peterson is a developer.
Oh, okay.
I mean, but yeah.
That was a bipartisan legislative press conference.
Okay.
But fair point. So I think that shows to me that this transcends political parties, it transcends the socioeconomic issues, because everybody at this point is struggling with housing. And when you have people like former President Trump, who has said that zoning reform is needed, and you have Biden's administration saying that zoning reform is needed, to me that means this is a right answer, an objective answer that most everyone can come to. And the fact that the local control argument of cities that are wanting to maintain their political power is what overrode logic in this instance is concerning to me.
Well, and like why? Because to me, like the governor signing this would have been easier than vetoing it politically, right?
Yeah.
So what is the cost that she would have actually had to pay in order to sign this that she wasn't willing to pay? Like, what is it the cities have on the governor? That's what I want to get at here. It's like, why are they so outsized influence?
I would like to ask this question of Governor Hobbs.
Should we invite her on?
We should.
Should we text her?
We
See
should
if
call
she
her.
shows up?
Just kidding. Joke.
I think
We should invite her.
Yeah, I think she changed her phone number. She doesn't answer my text anymore. She used to be fun via text. That's what happens when you get elected to statewide office.
Yeah, I guess so.
She'd text me late at night after a couple of drinks about some shit that was happening at the Capitol. None of that anymore.
We want to see those texts. Public records request.
So, I don't know, like, what else should we talk about? Does
Well,
anyone
but
want to
taking
go down on the
all the
house
zoning-
rabbit hole farther?
All the zoning control from the cities and towns was pretty dramatic. And, the developers loved it because they could build whatever they wanted to, wherever they wanted to build it. And that is not, I think that's why she vetoed it, because all those cities and towns and the Association of Cities and Towns just got everybody to call Hobbs and said, "Please veto this."
And
You know, for
I mean, they're
whatever
a force
reason
to
you
be
want to
reckoned
use.
with too. You
I
know,
want to.
but
I do
Mayor-
want to correct the record though. They could not build whatever they want wherever they wanted. It was very specific. It was very narrowly tailored. This bill was nowhere near as expansive as states like Oregon and California have passed. This simply said that for any new development with 5 acres of land would have to follow these regulations. So they could not build this in a typical single family neighborhood that's existing right now. We narrowed the bill significantly as a part of the compromise. But I do want to raise, Hank, and I do think it is interesting that the city councils use their government accounts to send these mass emails to all of their constituents, which as legislators, we don't have that privilege. We don't have just lists of constituents like the council has. And they send this blatant misinformation and they direct their constituents to send veto emails or contact their legislators. And it's so interesting to me about how and why they're able to use their government accounts to do this. But I called some of my constituents who emailed me with the league talking points, with the city of Glendale's direct email. And I had multiple constituents. One constituency even said, "Isn't this lobbying from a government account?" Like, she was the one that brought that to me to say, this doesn't seem right. But when I called my constituents and I said, this is what the bill actually does, and this is the misinformation you're getting from the city, they literally were like, that makes so much sense. Housing is a huge issue. We need to build. I support this bill. And now that you say it, I realize that my city council people are all very conservative, and this makes sense why they would be sending this misinformation. Thank you for explaining it to me.
Who specifically was sending the emails?
I know that I have confirmation that multiple Glendale City Council people were sending emails.
Interesting. Jerry doing that? I cannot imagine Jerry Wires doing something a little shady. It doesn't seem like the guy that I know. All right. Should we keep talking about housing? People love this stuff.
I was gonna say, have you considered talking to your local legislator about increasing more accountability for what cities can and can't do?
That might be something we should explore.
Wow. See, this is why I like this housing issue, is because it brings like the far left and the far right together. Just like the tamale veto, for example, the tamale bill. Like, that is deregulation in a way that Democrats like. So it's got this weird cross appeal of, the far left, the far right, both agreeing, and, people in the middle-ish, both agreeing that, like, this is common sense, we should do this. And then we've got the governor, like, vetoing these things. And I'm not exactly sure why. I liked your tweet about, like, I'm not sure what the governor's plan is on housing, because I feel that on all sorts of things, where it's just, like, pure chaos, and we're all guessing what's next.
I'm just laughing.
Yeah, there was no question there, I guess. Huh?
I guess one thing. I guess one thing that I would ask is, right, like, if we're talking about the hold that cities might have on the executive branch, right, of the governor's office, is like, are cities in Arizona valuing dollars, money, power more so than they are valuing the lives and the well-being of their constituents?
I think that was a question for you.
I think that was a question for everybody.
I say that actions speak louder than words. And when we have cities like Sedona proposing that people sleep in their cars and pay a fee to the city for the privilege of
I didn't know there was a
sleeping in their
fee
car.
involved in
Yes.
that. Oh my
yes.
God.
But
Are
then
you
turning
kidding me?
around and opposing statewide zoning reform,
Walmart doesn't charge a fee.
that tells you everything that you need to know.
I don't think they have a Walmart in.
Yeah, Walmarts aren't allowed in Sedona.
So
You
the
gotta drive
reality
it.
is that like the power and the dollars that we're getting from property taxes, the ability for us to have funds as a government organization, whether it's local, regional, statewide, is that the power and those dollars mean more than the people that the governments were meant to serve. If
Yeah,
actions
yes,
speak
and
louder
and
than words,
and
that's
I think yes, and I think we also look at whose words are valued most when it comes to the city council listening to their constituents, right? We so often hear, well, the people don't want this, and then we watch the planning and zoning committee, and the people coming out to oppose a low-income housing complex are mainly people who already own homes themselves and already are able to generate wealth. And the working parent who is facing eviction and has 2 jobs and is about to be pushed out of their apartment complex and can't find a low income place that they qualify to live in doesn't have time to go to the city council and say, I want this housing complex because otherwise I'm going to be sleeping in my car. And I think that's what was so insulting about the city talking about public comment and saying that we can't reform local zoning because it takes out public comment. Well, we saw what happened with public comment when the city of Phoenix was threatening to shut down a mobile home complex, which was mostly home to Latinos and Spanish-speaking residents. Mayor Gallego cut off public comment. You had people who took off work. You had children that were taken out of school so they could come testify and plead to the city council, please do not take away my neighborhood and my place where I live. And Mayor Gallego closed the public comment on them. So time and time again, the cities show us who they are.
private entities have the money to control the government.
There's a bigger problem from my perspective that the Arizona legislature seems to be trying to starve the cities and towns. And the most recent example was the removal of the rental tax. There are towns that is their primary revenue. And now they have to wonder how they're going to make it. And they're scrambling around. And no wonder they push back against things that the legislature are talking about.
Well, and honestly, like this whole thing kind of turns that dynamic of like cities and the states a little bit like, I don't know, it changes that whole thing in my opinion of like, we've seen these year after year just attacks from the legislature on cities.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, this could be as well considered that, but it feels like the cities in this case, completely have the upper hand. Like the cities are trying to stop this action from happening and have been very successful. And like, I guess my like big picture question is like, all right, so what needs to change? You know, if people agree with your vision for, you know, housing, zoning reform, how are we ever going to get this enacted in any serious level? Because we started yet last year with a much bigger goal. This year, a watered down goal has been vetoed. The watered down version of that watered down veto bill may have a chance if Governor Hobbs decides to sign it. We'll never know until it gets there, and it probably won't get there this year, let's be honest, right?
So one of my favorite authors recently did a shout out to me on TikTok, which I was really excited about. His name is Matthew Desmond. He's the author of Poverty by America and Evicted. And the point that he made in his TikTok was that it cannot just be representatives like me that are speaking about this. It has to be the community. And when we reach the community where they are, like me picking up the phone and calling my constituent and walking them through this bill, they understand it. Like the members of Fuerte and Unemployed Workers United who have come to monthly meetings with me and Ana Hernandez and other elected officials and activists, and we sit there and we eat textile burritos and we say, how are we going to get something done on housing this month? That is where the change is happening. And as we continue to organize and we continue to turn people out to say you cannot close your eyes to the housing crisis, the more progress we are going to make. And I do not want it to be forgotten how much progress we did make this year, right? We have Senator Hernandez's casita bill almost on its way to the governor's desk. If that is signed into law, it will make a huge difference for working families to be able to have their mother or their grandmother or their college student living on their same property, paying little rent or no rent. That is a huge win. That had huge bipartisan support in both chambers, which last year was unheard of for the casitas. You know, we had to work really, really hard to get buy-in on casitas. And
that's weird. I feel like that came out of the gate with like everyone liked it.
Because the casita bill?
Yeah.
Not last year. Not last year in the closed door discussions we had around
Even last
casitas.
year wasn't like this the league like, oh yeah, let's do casitas. Let's do casitas. We like casitas.
No, they actually have opposed this year's casita bill. Yeah.
I thought that was like the
No.
weakest, like fiddly dink thing that we could be doing on housing reform, and therefore the league was like, okay with it. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, seeing how many other states, both red and blue, have legalized accessory dwelling units, the fact that it has taken this much work to push this through the Arizona legislature is surprising. You're right. In
Haven't
that
most
regard.
cities even already done this?
No. Okay, I will say
Phoenix,
the
Tucson,
city of
Tempe.
Phoenix would not have passed their casita ordinance if Senator Hernandez and myself had not been pushing on these zoning reform measures. It took them 3 years from the time that they first proposed casitas
I do remember
to the
that.
time that was put across the finish line.
That happens a lot. at the
Because
city council.
why? They were worried that the state was going to preempt them on casitas. And now we have other cities that are jumping on the bandwagon, which is wonderful and great. Some of those ordinances are a little bit weaker than I would personally like to see. But I think the biggest thing for having the biggest argument for having a statewide ordinance is that we need that standardization across cities. You shouldn't be able to, just throw a rock, live somewhere else, and then I can't build a casita there. That just doesn't make sense in my view. And so that's why I'm a strong supporter of SB 1415.
So you're talking about like a 10-year grassroots reform plan.
That is what every major movement takes. And the fact that
But does this have to be a movement? I mean, I understand that a movement takes this. This is a fucking policy change, and not that drastic a one. Do we need to build a movement to get there? Is that really what it's going to take?
it's Arizona.
That is insane to me.
When I go to national conferences about affordable housing and zoning reform, and I talk to other Democrats from all other kinds of states, and I tell them what we're going through here in Arizona, they have that exact reaction.
All right, so a 10-year plan.
10-year plan. Let's do
10-year
it.
plan. 10 years from now, we can all
Started.
afford houses. There will be another economic crisis by then. Nobody will give a shit. Yeah, all right.
One of the more compelling arguments I heard from the league in opposition to the ADU bill as it was the requirements for ADUs that was in that bill. They said that they wanted them to at least have a kitchenette, at least, a couple other things. What's your kind of take on what is the minimum requirement? I know the idea is that, maybe grandma doesn't need a kitchen to live in my backyard, but what's your bare minimum of what this ADU ought to be square footage wise? What are the amenities that have to be part of it? Like how do you compartmentalize an argument like that where, yes, even if, she's on the outs or maybe they're not home or whatever else, do you not think that they should have a kitchenette? I mean, even most long-term motels have a kitchenette.
I think it comes down to as long the health and safety standards are there. It's a structure that's not going to fall down on you. That somebody could live there comfortably. I think we have to consider how much we want the government telling us what we must or must not have in our own homes or on our own property. When I first lived in a dorm at Taylor Place, I had a refrigerator and a microwave, and that was all we had. And so I think even I listen to Chad and Gato sometimes, and they had mentioned about living in a backyard casita with just a microwave and a refrigerator in it being
Both of them?
what was needed. One of them. I don't know which one. I
which
can't
one?
tell them apart. They're like the Olsen twins. But the thing is that when you talk about what is going to sell, right? What is the market going to demand? If I'm building something and I want to rent it out for extra income and I'm not getting any tenants because it does not have a kitchenette, then I would be willing to put in a kitchenette, But if I'm somebody that is building it for my college student, like I just said, and my college student doesn't need a kitchenette, again, how much do we want the government dictating what we can put on our own property beyond normal health and safety standards that we should have?
Wait, so break this down for me. What requirements would have been in the bill or are in the bill that is still moving, I guess?
It is typical health and safety standards, adequate plumbing, all of those
Bathroom,
things.
no
I believe.
kitchen, essentially?
I'm not
Not a Home
sure about the
Depot
bathroom. I know for sure. Not a Home Depot shed.
Okay. Home Depot shed if you can put the toilet in. and some running water.
Although the joke is amongst millennials that they go and shoot video of those sheds in the Home Depot parking lot and are like, "This is what I can afford."
Yeah,
because it's true. We can't.
they can't
Afford
literally
a home.
afford it, or they would buy it. They're just shooting it in the Home Depot parking lot because even those are unpaid.
Exactly.
Look at my new house.
I guess
Instagram.
I guess while I
What is-
understand like the government, quote unquote, government overreach and wanting to make sure that there isn't like the state telling you what you can and cannot have on your property, if we are talking about health and safety and just those two categories, isn't the access to cooking and like creating your own meals a part of your own health and safety, right? So by instituting those minimum requirements, while maybe the NAR or AAR or Phoenix Realtors or whatever associations might oppose that because of quote unquote like landowner rights, isn't that only looking toward the long game and helping homeowners to give those who are living in those ADUs the ability to provide for themselves? Isn't that giving them the ability to sell that home for more money because now that ADU is livable by anyone other than grandma, mother-in-law, their son or daughter who is in college, right? So I understand the government overreach part, but isn't a lot of what government does is look at what the longest game is? And truthfully, the longest game would be to set minimum requirements above 200 square feet to make sure that there is a kitchenette for the ability to provide for themselves and plumbing and a space to sleep.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
I think that this kind of rings to me in a certain way because when you said that like the government should get out of your way and stop telling what you can and can't build in your
I
backyard.
love hearing Democrats say that.
That's exactly where I was going with this. Like you said, this is an issue that's kind of galvanized the far right and the far left in terms of like maybe it's a certain libertarian tilt to it. But how would you identify in that space of like the typical classical liberal position is that the government is to protect you from private interest, but this is like, private government is impeding from your ability to access like your own freedoms, your own liberties. How would you approach that conversation from like a 40,000 foot philosophical perspective? Have you thought about it like
Yeah,
that?
how do you feel about like aligning with Warren Peterson?
Yeah, like, did you have to sacrifice some kind of goat in the desert to like, have a bill co-sponsored via Suchi? Or?
I think this is what's wrong with our politics is somebody saying like you can't sponsor. I sponsored a bill with Call It In on police quotas, saying I can't sponsor that bill because it's this person who I disagree with fundamentally on X, Y, and Z issue, but we agree on ABC issue. When I knocked on more than 10,000 doors personally to win my election the first time, voters overwhelmingly told me that they were tired of Republicans and Democrats pointing fingers at each other and not getting anything done for the people. My job is not to go down there and say, oh, I don't like Warren Peterson because he did this, or I don't like Wendy Rogers, so I'm not going to talk to them at all. No, my job is to find a way that we can find common ground to move good policy forward for people. I know that doesn't necessarily answer. I'm still confused on what your question was, but I think this question, and it is something that progressives and libertarians or far rights can agree on about what is the government's role in our property rights or in what we decide to do in our yard, and then we can get into all kinds of conversations around criminal justice reform and like marijuana legalization and all of these things in the past that libertarians and far right people have agreed with progressives. And so to me, I'm not going to close the door on a conversation with anybody because if we can find common ground on something, and I believe that it is what is best for my constituents, I'm going to find a way to get it done.
Well, and this actually may be like a good segue into your background. Like you mentioned, libertarians. You work for the ACLU, which is, sometimes aligning with those folks, and it makes for some really interesting dynamics. And like one of the things that I find fascinating about you is one, like you're a young politician. You seem like a person who is, I don't know, more authentic. That's a weird word to say than a lot of the politicians who run. Like your heart is in the right place, and also you come from this interesting background of reporting and then ACLU and then into policy. And I just wonder, like, I don't even know how exactly to phrase that, but like how that path has influenced your thinking and how that makes you different from a lot of your colleagues at the legislature. Because I don't think that a lot of people think like, oh, Alex Colligan's working on this, I should go buddy up with him or whatever. Like, that's just not like really common in either of the factions of the party. You know, there's a war mentality that you just kind of don't seem to have, I guess, in a lot of ways. Does that come from the ACLU back with the reporting? Like,
I think it comes from a little of both. I mean, as a reporter, it was my job to listen to both sides and figure out the nuance and tell the story in an objective way that I felt was fair to both sides, and to really connect with people on a human level that I otherwise might never have sat down with. So I think I do carry that with me in the work I do now. And then at the ACLU, right, I was working on criminal legal reform, and we had to find ways that we got criminal legal reform done in a very conservative legislature. So Walt Blackman
I was going to say, this was like back in the day when
sponsors.
that was really like kind of becoming a thing on the right.
That's right. And we worked with a lot of religious organizations and faith leaders. And we, a lot of the people who have been to prison themselves come home and they're not, you know, hardcore progressives. There was a lot of people who had been directly impacted by the criminal legal system who were Republican or Trump supporters. And then, of course, there were those who were Democrats. But the fact that they could all come together under this one shared understanding of the criminal legal system harmed us and we want to change it, definitely informs, you know, the path that I take now, because there are so many issues that transcend Republican or Democrat. And if we don't sit down and talk to each other, we're never going to find what that common ground is, and we're never going to find those allies who can really be effective in the moments that we need to be effective the most. And so I think both of my career paths have helped to inform my strategic viewpoints and how I move forward with legislation. And it does all come from a place of strategy. I'm a very thoughtful person. I am a very strategic person, and I'm grateful for the life experiences that I've had that have helped me carve this path in the legislature.
Yeah, you strike me as somebody who like understands strategy a bit more than the low bar, but rest of the legislators that I deal with.
Thank you.
I also I'm like fascinated. I'm always fascinated by anyone who worked in media and what they think of current day media. We've got another Substack crew here. We've got esteemed television reporter in the room.
Oh, I didn't even see him.
What's up, Graham?
How long have you been here? He's
Graham, this
two
is
bourbons
open. You just got to shout out. So if you wanna steal the clip and put it on 12 News, you just got to put the little agenda logo on the bottom.
Troll Tank, feel free to promote.
So like what do you make of the meat? We were talking about this at the previous bar because they wouldn't let us drink here before we got started. So we actually were an hour late to start because we were drinking elsewhere. And I don't want to like drag that whole thing up, but I think we have similar views on some certain topics about, you know, where the publications that we love are heading. I mean, all right, so when did you leave the media world, and like how has it changed since then, and like what's your vibe on where it's going, and why should anyone give a shit?
Okay, well, let's start with why you should give a shit.
Yeah.
Because it is the fourth estate. I fundamentally believe that we would not have a free and fair democracy without a strong, free and fair press. That is a core belief that maybe it was drilled into me in the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, but
Walter Cronkite School of Propaganda.
But I believe it 110%, and it's part of why I left the media. So I left in 2018. I was a TV reporter in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas and then in Las Vegas. And my whole thing coming out of Cronkite was like gung-ho, I'm going to be investigative. I'm going to go work over here, and then I'm going to come home and I'm going to be an ABC 15 reporter. That was my goal. ABC
not
15
not 12 News. Huh?
No, sorry,
okay.
Graham, not 12.
See ya.
And I very quickly learned that the industry was in trouble. I was doing the
They
job.
didn't tell you
two
that at J
people.
school? I was a little late by that point. Should have had a
They did.
seminar
they did.
on that shit.
I was just too bright-eyed. So I was my own camera person, my own, reporter. Obviously, I was an MMJ. Wasn't getting paid double, even though I was doing double work.
What
Really
was
had
your
no
salary?
incentive. My
Because
salary
I think that's an
on my
important thing for
first
people
job
to realize.
was $33,000 a year
$33,000
That
with
was
a
in-
college degree.
in 2015.
And if you had worked in the local In-N-Out burger,
I don't know what it would have.
it probably would have cracked
Probably,
40
yeah.
though, right? If you're
Probably.
working full time.
With
$20 an hour at that point.
Probably. Yeah.
That's what it was at a
I have never made
Yeah.
$20 an hour
40
in my
grand.
life.
More than the
I
legislature.
still don't make $20 an hour, considering how many hours I work. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah, and wanted to do investigative work. In Texas, I got to do a little bit more of that. When I got to Vegas, that was just completely out the window. It was all about ratings. It was all about what's the most, scandalous, kind of splashy idea. We really had no time to actually work on stories, to dig into our beat. We had producers that were fearful of holding government accountable. All kinds of things that just made me realize, like, this is not the place to make the change I want to see in this world. And so I left in 2018 after covering the mass shooting on the Las Vegas Strip. A few months later, as tragic and terrible as it was to have to cover that, a few months later, there was the shooting in Parkland. And I remember sitting in the room where our cameras were all stored, and I was supposed to go out and do a story about like a high school that was using like a Native American mascot that was offensive. That was my story for the day. But this mass shooting had just happened in Parkland, and it was so real and raw with what had literally just happened months before in Vegas. And I just couldn't focus on that other story. So I sat in the camera room watching Ted Cruz getting grilled by these high school students at that CNN debate, and I was neglecting my work, and I didn't care that I was neglecting my work. I was watching these high schoolers, and I was like, this is the future. This is the change that we need in our country. And that was a really defining moment for me. And very shortly after that, I started applying for all kinds of jobs and got the job at the ACLU and immediately took it and moved back home and never looked back.
And then why politics? I mean, like, going in, working for the ACLU is a noble profession. Politics ain't.
Yeah, I think the craziest thing was I was making $101,000 at the job I got at ACLU
Hey,
National.
Look at this, a reporter who did good. Good for you.
And
And then you went back to the only job that pays less than reporting.
And then I was like 4 months. I was like, I want to run for office. They were like, you have to quit. And I was like, 101,000 or quit and follow my heart. I'm gonna follow my heart. So yeah, I loved working at the ACLU. I loved it. I learned so much. I think that the work I did really make a change and helped people, especially those who had just come home from prison, kind of learning how to tell their stories and advocate for themselves and get involved in political change. But as I would sit in those hearing rooms at the Capitol and hear some of the nonsense come out of legislators' mouths.
Which one specifically?
Well, you know. You
I
can
do,
go
but I
find
want to hear
it.
from you.
And I just realized, I could be doing that job, and our community deserves people that will fight for them and care about them, and not take no for an answer. So that's why I ran.
I enjoyed it.
And I'd like to say, I love that strategic thought and your arc, your career arc. It's just wonderful. It's
Thank
great.
you. Thank you so much.
It's not often that a reporter goes and, I've met reporters who, are in politics. But it's rare, and they're mostly burnouts, I mean, maybe you just burnt out young, but it's not people who made an active decision to leave journalism most of the time. It's people who were laid off and then forced through this PR pipeline into an epiphany of like, God, these people are all dumb. I'm smarter than them. Why don't I do their job? You know, but this seems more purposeful, I guess.
Was that from Carrie Lake's memoir?
Oh God, I didn't even think about Carrie Lake as I was saying that. Yeah, there's a lot of us out there running for office. I'm all right. I want to talk about like your TikTok, and because I just watch your TikTok to see you like walking around Maryvale, and I find it fascinating. So either like TikTok or like, what's the value of TikTok, and how are you using it? And then like also, I just love that like you're taking us along on your canvassing, and like it seems like there's a lot of shit going on in your canvassing world in Maryvale, and I would love to hear some like war stories of like the weirdest house you've knocked on, or the most impactful story that you've heard. I saw one on I think it was your Twitter the other day about a woman who had spent several years in jail over stealing essentially $67, was it?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Her brother's still there.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I started using TikTok for my campaign. When I first launched my campaign, I didn't really think it was going to be anything. I thought that, if anything, it could give me a few donations here and there.
How many followers do you have?
30,000.
Wow. Damn.
The first time I ran for office, so nobody knew me, I would knock on doors and people would swing the door open and be like, "Oh my God, I know you from TikTok." And that was the first time that I was like, "Oh my God, this is reaching the people I need, and I need to keep doing this."
Really, back then?
Yeah.
Like,
And
I can see it now when you've got the rep and your title and, like, you're getting a following, but
no,
how many followers did you have at that point?
I don't remember how
Like
quickly my
10,000
following
or
grew.
below?
Maybe 2,000. Yeah.
And they were all in Maryvale?
Yeah. And yeah, it was reaching the right people. The algorithm is incredible.
Hey,
And
way to go, that Chinese technology, huh?
and so I use it because it's important to, in my view, kind of give people a behind the scenes look into what goes into a campaign, but also what goes into the legislature and the legislative session. And people are so fascinated by the behind the scenes antics at the legislature. You know this from your publication. It's all about the antics, and you have a huge following. And so when
Not that huge. Your following is much larger than mine. If you want to do a little promotion,
will do.
You know, we would appreciate it.
When I can break that down for the average person, it really feels purposeful to me. But I love canvassing. It's literally my favorite thing. I've loved it ever since I first knocked on a door, which was for Raquel Teran in 2018. And the best part about it is you never know who you're going to meet, and you never know what story they have to tell.
Yeah.
And so the person you referenced, a woman, I knocked on her door just the other day, and I asked her, I always ask, my question's the same to every voter, are there any issues that you care about most that you want me to fight for? And she said prison reform. And I said, well, thank you for mentioning that. I really care about this as well as part of my work before I was elected. What change would you like to see? And she told me that her brother had been in prison for 45 years.
45 years?
45 years for stealing $67. She said the judge told him he would get a year for every dollar he stole. Now, maybe there are some other factors that led to this longer prison sentence, right? I didn't want to dig in or, make her brother feel like more of an outcast of society than he already is, right? To be like, well, he must have deserved it. I think anybody following Arizona prisons and Arizona's sentencing law knows that there are so many people who do not deserve that much time behind bars. So I listened to her and I heard her out, and she told me about how she writes to her brother, how he knows someone in there who's going blind and he has to have another incarcerated person walk him around the prison, that this man is elderly and blind and isn't a harm to society, and she doesn't understand why he's behind bars. And there are so many people like that who literally get disappeared by our prison system. They are locked up, they are forgotten about, and that has always been something that I care about deeply. And so when she told me this story, it just really resonated with me, because how many other people are there in her shoes who have a loved one locked up for decades for a low-level nonviolent crime? who don't have anybody to talk to or don't have an elected official who would be willing to listen to them. So that's why I decided to share her story.
Most of them, I imagine. You know, most people who
Yeah.
have that problem have probably never even spoken to a politician.
Yeah.
That's So you're out there campaigning again.
Yes.
I noticed that you have a Democratic challenger for as you attempt to move from the House to the Senate.
Yes.
I noticed he filed more signatures than you know.
He paid for every single signature.
Okay, tell me
and,
more.
Did not collect a single signature himself.
Really? And what else do we know about this? I've literally never even Googled the poor guy's name. I'm just going to ask you
Well,
on the spot here.
You know, we did some Googling.
Yeah, did you Google?
Googling.
What'd you find?
We found some pictures with Miss Carrie Lake
No.
at several campaign
Like
events.
back in the day when she was a newscaster, was he on her show?
Back in 2022 when she
Okay,
was running for governor
not that
as the
long
far
ago.
right MAGA extremist
Yeah.
candidate. And we saw him promoting many of her campaign events in 2022.
And this is
Lots
a
of her
Democratic
campaign
challenger.
events. Yes.
Weird.
It is weird.
Have you talked to this guy?
I have not.
Okay, let's give him a call. We can just do this
Round
interview
of shots,
live.
we'll
Yeah,
give him a
right.
call.
I have his number. Well, we'll get to it.
Well, I
We'll get
think
to it.
that's
It's a
the
long story list.
Interesting thing, right? As Democrats start to get closer to getting a majority,
Mm-hmm.
I think the Republicans are they're waking up to that, and they're putting these nefarious techniques into play. And I think that's what's happening in Legislative District 24.
So do you think that's actually coordinated?
I do.
Oh, it's not just a nutter. Like a one-off weird guy who just like, there you get a lot of those in politics. You know, egomaniacs who have no real beliefs and just swing from thing to thing and want to be noticed. They're never going to win. They don't care about winning. It's get my face on a billboard, on a sign in your yard and something. It's not that. You think this is actually coordinated?
There's a potential it could be that. But I
Fascinating.
think that Republicans really are fearful of the change that is happening in the state, and the fact that somebody who so blatantly supports Carrie Lake is running as a Democrat in a blue majority Latino district is not only scary but insulting. It's insulting to my constituents.
Yeah, because I mean, the premise is there is like nobody gives a shit, nobody pays attention, and you know, one Latino name on the ballot is the same as the next, or you know, whatever it is. Like that people just don't know, right? Like to me, that seems to be the calculated decision, or there is no real calculation there, and it's just a weird guy who's just running for office. That's
Is he
totally
a Latino?
plausible.
Yes. Right. Yeah. It could be either, but all I know is that my constituents are smart. They do their research. They grill me, and so I hope they will grill other candidates on the ballot. And anyone,
But that guy's not showing up at the door. He's just sending a paid circulator, right? So
yeah, that's right.
Aside on that, you said that the things are changing in Arizona and that people are moving to different parties. Do you think that's the case, or that the parties are better reflecting the constituencies of your district of Arizona? I know that obviously Maryvale's always been a longtime Democrat district, but I think that we're seeing a change in Arizona politics electorally, but I don't think in terms of the issues and how people place things that the issues are changing that much. I just think that the parties are better or changing what their platforms are and what's important. Do you agree with that? Do you think the Democrat Party now and the Republican Party now are the same that they were 8 years ago, and that the people of Arizona are changing, or that the parties themselves are changing?
They're the parties themselves. Well, the Republican Party in particular is changing, and I think there are a lot of Republicans that are willing to vote Democrat who weren't before, because of the extremism, the election denial stuff, the rhetoric, the hateful rhetoric, and so I think that that's why we're seeing this trend towards, we Democrats won statewide offices last year or in 2022, and I think we're going to continue to see the legislature turn blue, and as I think Republicans are not wising up to the fact that the election denial stuff is a huge turnoff, and that demonizing immigrant communities and the LGBTQ plus community and taking away the right to choose for yourself whether to have an abortion or not. Those are not popular ideas, and we've seen the Republican Party dig their heels into those ideas. So I feel confident that Democrats will continue to win, and I hope that we will not see more people like my opponent who think that they can just pull the wool over people's eyes.
But I mean, I guess when it really boils down to it, not to completely challenge everything you just said,
Challenge it.
which means I'm just gonna, is that, you know, you said that it's not popular for the people, but right now, as of 2-3 days ago, Ruben Gallego had 51% of the votes and Carrie Lake had 49. And when Carrie Lake was running against Governor Hobbs, there was a mere few thousand difference. So you say that those policies aren't the thoughts and the wants of the people, but we're talking about neck and neck for 2 elections at this point. So isn't it safe to say that the reality is that the Republican Party may have changed, but the voters have changed just as much?
No, I think the problem and why we see that closer gap or closer numbers is because of the disenfranchised Democrats who do not come out to vote. I think that, like, if we made it easier to vote, if we had automatic voter registration, and if Democrats, frankly, did a better job of communicating to the people about what we can accomplish when we are in power, we would have that gap would be, explosive in terms of Democratic support. I think the Democrats' challenge continues to be turning out people who feel like their vote doesn't matter or feel like the Democratic Party has neglected them. Now, Democrats, in my view, need to do a better job at showing all of the things we've accomplished. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, how that will have direct savings for Arizona families. Is that message really getting out there to the average, worker who doesn't really, follow CNN or doesn't know how to access that money that they could save under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act? I don't know if that message is really resonating in the way that it needs to, but if it did, I do believe that the polling and the numbers would be different. Because when you just talk about the issues, we see people of both political parties agreeing overwhelmingly with access to abortion, with some of these housing policies like rent control. Rent control is wildly popular. Opportunity Arizona just did a poll on that and showed that rent control was extremely popular, but you even have some Democrats that are afraid of being pro rent control. And so I think that it's really important to put aside the political parties, the rhetoric, and put aside who the actual voter turnout and focus on those people who are not coming to the polls. Why are they not coming to the polls, and how do we get them there? Because they overwhelmingly share our views. I fundamentally believe that because of the, thousands of conversations I've had with people, not just strong Democratic voters, but those people that are not typically talked to by the party.
I think we talked about, have the parties changed? Yes, the parties have changed. Republicans used to be the party of the big tent. Now they're the party of the small tent. And the Democrats need to say, well, those people who left outside the tent, you're welcome in. And that's what Biden is doing. He's saying, oh, why don't you come and join us? We have a lot in common, and we do. And I think that change is going to be huge.
I'm curious, actually. I just want to push back on one of the things you said. You talk about voter turnout, for example. But where we saw the neck and neck challenges with, Hobbs and Lake in 2022 was the second highest turnout since the year 2000 in a presidential election. So there wasn't a problem with turnout, and yet here we are neck and neck. So are we saying there's a problem with turnout, but there's way more people, despite the fact that we have record turnout? Where's the disconnect? correct.
Was that record turnout amongst Democrats, all registered Democrats?
I guess this is all registered voters.
Okay. Yeah, I would have to dig deeper into the numbers, but the point I'm trying to make is there are many registered Democrats or people who are not registered as either party that I feel Democrats need to do a better job of reaching and talking to.
Or is this a uniquely Arizona thing? Because we have more independents.
We do have more independents.
And I wonder if the issue here is not a Democrat-Republican turnout issue. It is a how do you appeal to people who historically believe in a really wide variety of choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that might be it. I think Arizona has always been unique in that way. And I think it shows in our the fact that we had Democrats elected to the statewide offices, but then as people are going down the ballot, they start to go back to Republican and elected a Republican majority legislature. So I do think Arizona is unique in the fact that we do have so many independent voters. I do think that, again, I will reiterate, I really feel this way. The Democrats need to do a better job of appealing to independent voters and really showing that we are the party of supporting small business owners. We are the party of supporting working class families and working class people. And I think that message needs to be communicated and that we need to ensure that people who do not typically vote come out.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Please take the
Not a
floor.
reporter asking a follow-up.
I know.
So I think one of the things that, as we go out and talk to a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of worry that the culture wars are very much popular right now, especially when it comes to LGBTQ plus issues. And the Republican rhetoric, as unpopular as it might be in some places in Arizona, is quite popular. So what is the battle against that when, you have Carrie Lake running?
Yeah. Well, we have to combat the misinformation. I think we have to educate people one-on-one and with relational organizing. I did have a voter several months ago talk about when, again, the first question I asked, what are you concerned about? What do you want me to fight for? They said boys using girls' bathrooms. And so I started to dig in. Where are you hearing this? What school district is this happening? She couldn't answer those questions in particular. So then we had a conversation about the misinformation that is out there and why there are certain vulnerable groups of people that are being used to kind of scare others, and how that is not realistic to what is happening in our schools, and how trans children in particular are a very vulnerable population who deserve protections. And eventually we were able to come to the same page on that. So I think this is where we talk about deep relational organizing, that you can't just send a mailer and expect that that's going to turn out the voters. You have to have those conversations and combat that misinformation face to face, because it's so easy for Republicans to use communities like the LGBTQ plus community as a distraction and to basically spread harmful rhetoric and rumors that are on the backs of people's lives and that cause violence to our communities. It's so gross. But when you have an in-depth conversation with someone, we can combat the misinformation that is out there and bring people along. I truly believe that. But it takes investment. And the Democratic Party, I think, understands what relational organizing, how much investment that takes. And we need to be investing in, boots on the ground and people to have these conversations with their neighbors day to day, instead of spending a bunch of money on mailers that fearmonger, like the Republican Party is doing. And I do think that is going to bring people along. And so I don't feel as though this long-term game of scaremongering that Republicans are doing is going to result in wins, because I think the average person sees through that once you sit down and have a conversation with them.
So do you feel that it is safe to say that right now, on a state level, the Democratic Party is not doing enough and is not doing what it needs to engage voters, educate voters, and galvanize those of the same sort of thought process in their own politics. And not to like make you call out your coworkers, but also like, but the reality is that the last 50 years of the Republican Party have been built on one full strategy and has aligned 50 states on how they want to go, and the Democrats have sort of been a buckshot, right? It's been sort of sprayed everywhere. So
I think that's a bit unfair of a reductivism of the Republican Party, or like the old Republican Guard's strategy for things. I mean, the highest Latino turnout for any election ever was Bush in 2004, and he got 40 some odd % of the Latino vote. Like we've never seen anyone court that demographic quite like Bush, like both Bushes did. And Jeb Bush is married to a Latino woman. We've seen them like tailor different policies that worked for that time. I think saying that they've been running the same playbook is a bit reductive in like their strategy. And I do appreciate the approach that the big tent that the Democrat has an opportunity to like monopolize on now. But to say that like, I think it's more so that the Republican Party that is galvanized around Donald Trump has left behind a certain moderate, I always call them the palate cleanser, someone who will vote for Katie Hobbs at the top of the ticket and Kimberly Eve for treasurer, because I want, I'm tired of this hard right rhetoric and style of politics. But at the end of the day, I want a Republican running my economy. I want a Republican as, Secretary of Public Instruction. So I think that voter really exists in Arizona, and maybe that's not a Maryville or an LD24 voter, but they exist out there. And I'm just, do you approach yourself, and maybe this is like a conversation for like the rest of your career, do you see yourself sympathizing with this generic Arizona voter, or do you tailor yourself and your politics more around what your district is?
I mean, go ahead.
Sorry. The only thing that I would push back in what you said, Rex, is that like I completely agree that voter does truly exist in Arizona. I see myself falling into the category, but I think the thing that I would push back specifically is when you say the Republican Party and the Democratic Party has catered or so to the Latino voter, but then that's saying that the Latino voter is a monolith.
Correct.
And we can say that they are not a monolith whatsoever. My own background, like I am a first generation Mexican woman, and I have completely vastly different opinions and a background than a Cuban voter would. Mm-hmm. And that's completely fair. And that I think that is an issue that happens in both parties. Mm-hmm. I know in the 2016 election, how the Democratic Party talked about Latino voters was very much in a monolith. Mm-hmm. So how do you now, as in modern day identity, seeing that African Americans, Latino voters, like even these subsections of society that aren't quote unquote the majority, they are vastly different. And like Greg said, they might vote for a Republican at the top of the ticket, at the bottom of the ticket, a Democrat. How do you really cater to these identities now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to answer your question, I was elected by the people of Maryville and Glendale. My job is to serve them. I listen to them and I answer to them, and they hold me accountable to that. But there, like you said, with there being a monolith, not a monolith of Latino voters, there also is not a monolith of LD24 voters, right? We're a Democrat majority district, but people have vastly different views on all kinds of issues. And I think the important thing is to just come to a point of understanding of what do we all want at the end of the day? We all want to go home, to have a safe place over our head, for our kids to be safe, to have our loved ones be happy, to be able to make enough money to sustain ourselves and our children. And so it's all about making sure that we can break down these arguments for people. When we talk about culture wars, we are literally talking about, when we talk about trans rights, for example, of robbing a very vulnerable, marginalized segment of our population of the ability to go home and lay their head on safely on their pillow and have their loved ones and be who they are authentically. Why would we want to rob an entire class of people of that luxury of being able to exist as who they are? And when we have those conversations, in my experience, the very Catholic voter will get on board and understand that, and we might not agree 100% of what we need, the policy we need to pass. But I do believe that there are moments where we can stop some of these most harmful pieces of legislation through having those conversations. And then to your point, I think that as a Democrat, as an elected Democrat, I have a duty to help every voter understand the accomplishments that the Democrats have achieved while in office and what we will commit to should we gain a majority. And so I feel as though the strategizing that we are doing as a caucus behind closed doors every day to win this majority are things that I'm very proud of, that I can take back to my community and say, this is what Democrats have accomplished and will continue to accomplish if you elect us to a majority. Now, do I think there is room for improvement? Absolutely. Like I said, if we don't have a big housing win this year, and the number one issue that the constituents of Mary Van Glendale are asking me is about affordable housing, that's going to be challenging for me to go back home and explain what Democrats were able to accomplish. And that's why I feel so passionately about this, because I want our Democratic governor to succeed. I want our Democrats to gain a majority. And that is why I fight so hard for these wins, to be able to go back home and deliver this to voters. And so that's what I personally am committed to. And I always tell my constituents when they tell me they do have issues with the Democratic Party, which there's a lot of 3 out of 3 Democrat voters. And for those who don't know, 3 out of 3 Democrat means you have voted in all 3 of the last 3 primary elections. When a 3 out of 3 Democrat voter tells me I'm upset about this or that with the Democrat Party, I always tell them I will bring that to the higher ups within the Arizona Democratic Party, and I will tell them how you feel, because that is my duty. And the Democrat Party has a responsibility to listen to every registered Democrat and what they want in their community.
Well, and actually, we've gone for a long time now.
Yeah.
This has been fascinating. I could do it all night. But there's 2 things I kind of want to touch on, and that leads us nicely into the last 2 things. Is a lot of attention gets paid to the war for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. There is a similar war, perhaps not equal, happening within the Democratic Party. And I don't know exactly what to ask you about this, but clearly you're on one side. A lot of other Democrats are on another. There are sides here. And how do you, how do you relate that to what's happening within the Republican Party? What do you think is the fallout of that, or the future of that, or where is the Democratic Party going? And then also I wanted to kind of end on, you had mentioned earlier about if we were in control, the Democrats, and give us a vision for what that would look like. Would it be just as dysfunctional as the Republicans? Because the riff is struggling these days. You're complaining about the governor's vetoes. That is Doug Ducey versus the Freedom Caucus circa 2018 stuff.
Did you just equate me to the Freedom Caucus? Wow.
Is that just a function of having to govern? Is it just shit goes crazy when you get in power? Or what would a Democratic majority look like?
Okay.
Even? Who would the majority be? Would it be a Freedom Caucus Democrat majority, or a moderate business Democrat majority? What?
Okay. One, shit has not gone crazy just because I disagree with one of the governor's veto. That should
Several of the governor's vetoes, no?
That's the only one I have a really big issue with.
Tamales?
That was last year.
Okay.
That's
One
so,
per year.
That's so 2023. Okay. So when we think about, I can disagree with the governor on policy issues. That is how a functioning government should work. We should not want our politicians agreeing with every single thing and things just sailing through, right? That creates policy that is not good or thoughtful.
That's what happens in Tucson.
Okay. So we need healthy disagreement and healthy arguments. That shouldn't be something that we shy away from. Now, you asked like several different questions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay, well, so I
the
want to
war
answer
for
your
the heart
first
and
question
soul
on
of
this.
the Democratic Party, and
Because-
if you win the majority, are we
yeah.
going to end up in the same kind of screwy,
No.
the party in control is just dysfunctional?
I
like
don't
we have.
think we will, because one, Democrats are the adults in the room. Okay, even though the governor vetoed our
Tell that
bill,
to
for
Lisa
example.
The
series over.
I was hoping you would end that way. Please throw the mic. Walk out.
Drop it in your drink. That's good.
So even I can't even go on after that. So even though we might disagree on certain policy points, right? We've had a duty as Democrats to deliver on things that have been neglected for so long in this state, and there are many things that all Democrats can agree on, regardless of faction, right? Fully funding our public schools, passing common sense laws that will rein in gun violence. I think what could be a big fight, because we would need 2/3 in order to pass tax law, would be trying to get our tax law back in order after the Republicans have destroyed it by giving giveaways to the wealthiest Arizonans and corporations. We want to focus on housing, and we might disagree on some of those housing points, but I think there are many spots that we can agree on, like overturning the preemption on inclusionary zoning and the preemption on rent control. So what I envision personally, this is just me, if I was in leadership and I could wave a wand, we would start on day one with our 10 policy priorities that we could get done. Bam, 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 bam. Signed into law. We're on the path to a better Arizona. Then the next few months, we start hashing out those issues that are a little bit tougher to gain Democrat consensus on. And we don't need to imagine what this is like, because there are states like Michigan that have recently flipped the majority to Democratic control after decades of Republican control. And we are learning from them, right? We are watching what they're doing. We are learning where there may have been mistakes or pitfalls. And I feel as though we would be incredibly prepared to hit the ground running with the things that we have committed to for year after year after year. If we were in the majority, we would do X. If we were in the majority, we would do Y. Let's get it all done in the first couple months. And then we save the rest, the harder conversations that might take multiple legislative sessions to get done. I do think criminal justice reform would be one of those issues. And we would go from there. And then to your point about factions of the Democrat Party, right? So I'm a member of the Working Families Party, which is a organization, a C4 organization that kind of focuses on what are issues that a working families candidate could truly embody that are progressive, that specifically focus on working class people. It doesn't mean I'm not a Democrat and that I don't champion Democrat ideals, but it means that when I make certain decisions on bills that might be in conflict with my party, I'm going to be on the side of the working class and of working people. And so I think any political party is going to have those different viewpoints, and that's healthy. Again, I think there are a lot of primaries going on around the state, like the one that I'm in, that will dictate what kind of majority we're going to have. But I don't think that you're going to see the dysfunction that we're seeing with the Republican Party and the Freedom Caucus. Not at all.
Famous last words. Let's end there. That is perfect.
I have one more question.
Oh no, I'm scared.
Don't be scared. What is the most interesting thing you're working on that most people don't know anything about?
Oh my gosh, that's hard. Because I feel like I'm so vocal with what. Oh,
Tell us your
okay.
secrets.
Okay.
Whatever you want to say.
The most interesting thing I'm working on, that people don't know about. Well, we're about to start budget negotiations. I'm really excited to make some budget asks. I would really like to champion childcare, which was a bill that I had introduced that did not receive a hearing, but that we can still talk about in the budget negotiations. I also think we need to look at models like infrastructure banks in order to be able to have the money that's coming from the federal government to help people weatherize their homes and things like that. to
This
be
is
able
Chuck's green
to
bank
help
thing
out
that you're
with
talking
loans
about?
like that.
Wow.
Infrastructure bank.
Okay.
What about state
And
arts funding?
state arts funding. I'm a member of the Arizona Theater Company board. We need state arts funding.
And when are we going to get a line item for like journalism and
Oh, that is
local
something.
news
It's
thing?
something exciting that I worked on that people don't know about. I co-sponsored.
Memorial, thank you. Thank you, somebody, for mentioning the Don Bowles.
That's what I should have mentioned.
Yeah.
I co-sponsored a bill to help protect student journalists
Oh.
from
Yeah.
overreach
Old Yee bill.
by their school administrations.
It was a Yee bill back in the day.
Cook sponsored it this year. I co-sponsored it.
Yeah,
I
you
loved
did the
that
same
bill.
thing.
And these
Good
student
stuff.
journalists came and talked to me. They were so cool. They were so smart. And they were like,
No, we need
What
a
kind of-
tax for journalism.
Well,
Come on. Just add a cent to the sales tax. Give it out to all the
Woo!
foreign nonprofit journalism outlets in this
You're
country.
saying you don't believe in the separation of journalism and state?
It's a complicated matter, but we've already
Look at
got.
that.
Okay, wait. If
Look
you
at
guys
that.
want to get into public notices, I'll give you an hour-long lecture on the public notice law.
Thanks
I'm an expert.
for coming.
Let's end this.
Cut.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Your generous time that I know cost you serious money and not making donor phone calls.